A recent study has parents concerned as it reveals that our youth are being targeted with violent videos. Joining us today to discuss this is Dr. Katelin Neufeld. She is a behavioral research scientist with the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. Welcome to Bridge City News.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome, Katelin. Okay, you were one of the authors of this report, which found that a large majority of Canadian youth are exposed to content featuring real violence and gore, primarily on mainstream social media platforms. So, in fact, what is it, 85% of you said that they have seen this. Did that number surprise you?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It was 85% had seen at least one form of real violence or gore online. That was higher than we thought. We actually expected that there would also be a gender difference, in particular with boys seeing greater exposure, but that's not the case. And I think, like you said, it really comes down to the fact that this is popping up on platforms that kids spend a lot of time on.
So we're talking TikTok, Snapchat, any of it really, right?
Yeah,
Instagram,
the top three were
Discord.
YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram.
Gotcha. Okay. So not going into too much detail, but what kinds of violent and gory videos are we talking about here? Can you give us some examples?
For sure. So the most common, with about 3/4 of teens in Canada, was physical fights, and that ranged from, just a somewhat random video of people they didn't know, but sometimes also, and most upsettingly for some kids, it was maybe a fight in their schoolyard amongst their peers that they were seeing online. From there, we also had things like a lot of police violence, in particular with ICE videos from the United States, terrorist content. There was also violence against not only humans, but also animals being tortured and killed. And then I think most surprising to us actually was the amount of exposure to sexual violence online. So about 13% of teenagers had seen adults being sexually abused, but 10% of teenagers in Canada had seen another teen being sexually abused in a photo or video.
Oh my gosh, that's really horrifying and jarring. It's interesting that the vast majority of these teenagers were not actively searching for this content either, yet it shows up on their online feed. So it looks like the study is saying that a significant issue is social media algorithms targeting teens with this content. And of course, we're all familiar with these algorithms. It's as soon as you click on one thing, you're suddenly inundated with similar content. But this report is saying these kids aren't even searching for this or clicking on anything similar.
That's right. So, it used to be back in an earlier version of the internet, this content was there, but you had to really know where it was or try really
Right.
hard to look for it, right? Maybe some fringe gore site.
Yeah.
But
The
only
dark web.
7%, only 7% of kids actually sought this out. Instead, most of them were fed it algorithmically, it seems, either just popping up, as some of them said, in their Explore or For You pages on their feed, or maybe it was something that a stranger had posted and then came up for them and just started to play.
Any thoughts on what can be done about these algorithms?
Absolutely. That one of the things we looked at in the study was what platforms say the rules are in terms of what kind of content users can and can't post on it, and sometimes also whether or not they will allow it and let kids see it. And it's a bit of a patchwork, but for the most part, the platforms are saying that a lot of the forms of violence and gore that we studied aren't actually supposed to be on their platforms at all. So even before the algorithms, something that could be done is just enforcing their own rules a bit better, like greater investment in content moderation, and maybe especially so for some of our youngest users, such as teenagers and kids. And then you're right, from there, content moderation can feed into the algorithms themselves, making sure that some of that really violent and content is not getting shown to maybe any users, and especially kids. And I want to be clear, in the report, we didn't just ask kids, what are you seeing, but also, how do you feel about it and what do you want done? And overwhelmingly, their responses were quite negative. They have a lot of negative emotions like fear and anxiety, um, sometimes even anger, and they don't want to be seeing it. The number one thing that they say they want to see is for the content to be banned, or users who are showing it to be banned from these platforms. So they have a lot of great ideas as well that would tie into how to stop seeing this.
Interesting. I love that. You kind of went into it, you touched on it a little bit there, but how does violence and gore affect a teenager's mind and emotions?
Yeah, I mean, so what in terms of what they told us, it was we wanted to go in and be open to all possibilities of how they might be experiencing this. Maybe over time they've just become very habituated and maybe don't feel much when they see it, or maybe for some people maybe they're seeking it out and might have positive emotions. But like I said, it was overwhelmingly negative emotions that they were saying that they're feeling as a result of seeing this kind of content, and quite frequently. And some of them talked about how, those feelings last with them for a really long time. Yeah, to the point that it's quite upsetting to be encountering, and especially when you feel like you can't really avoid it.
Yeah.
I can imagine that's tough too. Though we didn't ask them about other types of impacts, I've heard it likened to thinking about your digital content intake as a diet, right? If we are what we eat, what does that say for this type of content, and what kind of impacts does that have on us over time?
Yeah. You mentioned up top there terrorism. Some of it's terrorism. Any thoughts on if any of these terrorist groups are specifically targeting these kids to almost like recruit them?
Yeah, so we didn't get into that in this study. Certainly, though, Canada has recently designated the group 764 as a terrorist entity, and we do know through our work at the Canadian Centre for Child Protection and operating our services like Canada's tip line for the reporting of online child sexual abuse and exploitation, just cybertip.ca, and also Need Help Now, where kids who have been impacted by online sexual violence can come if they'd like some support. We have been seeing every year increasing numbers of kids who are impacted by those types of groups or sadistic online exploitation. Yeah, so though not studied in this report in particular, certainly that is an ever-growing issue and concern in Canada and abroad.
Absolutely, definitely. I would assume that the social media companies get complaints about this content. So do we know if these companies are taking the complaints seriously and doing something about it?
Well, in terms of in this study, one of the things we asked kids was, when you've encountered this content, what have you done? And in this study and in our own work, working alongside survivors of online sexual violence, sometimes it comes down, but other times it's really tough, especially when kids are trying to go on this on their own. In the context of violence and gore, sometimes if you reach out to a platform, if that's not already against a platform's rules, there might not even be an option to report it at all. And then other times, kids talk about reporting and just not hearing anything back, or maybe only getting an automated response that's not specific to them, and never seeing change happen.
Right, yeah. And some of this content, they might not even think to talk to their parents about it. Like if it's a school fight or something, it's something the kids kind of talk amongst themselves about and not necessarily bring it home. But I was going to mention too, social media companies, if they're not taking this seriously, they probably should be, because I recall not too long ago, a young woman sued Meta for causing her depression and anxiety that started in her teens, and it followed her into her adulthood, and she won her case. So this was a huge breakthrough. I can imagine stuff like this going in that direction in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah, we agree, and we really hope so as well. We think that this is a problem that the companies have created, and for, I don't know, over 20 years now have been able to get away with it. And so it's really time and important to have strong laws and enforcement that will help ensure that these companies are acting responsibly and not just pursuing profit over safety and child safety in particular.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, you're mentioning that it's, this content isn't happening by accident, that it's ending up in the child's feed. It seems like it's specifically targeting teens. So is there a reason as to why this is happening? Is it simply about clicks or monetization?
Yeah, it's tough to say because there isn't a lot of transparency right now, but that's another thing that can be written into really good, strong, effective regulation is for companies to be uh, transparent about what kinds of things go into the decision making behind who is shown what, or just making changes to it to ensure that kids of certain ages or people of certain ages rather are not exposed to that type of content.
Right. What would you like to see governments do? Would you like to see them get involved? I know there is a bill right now trying to limit the amount of social media content that children are seeing or youth.
Yeah, absolutely. We think that that would be a huge and really exciting step. We're very glad to see that Canada has signaled again that they really value children and want to keep them safer, along with survivors of sexual violence on the internet. So this bill would, we don't have to get into the specifics, but it would definitely have a number of positive steps forward in protecting kids from seeing this kind of content
Right.
online.
And we cannot forget about parents' roles here as well. Many people would say it's not up to the government to parent to your kids. So what role should parents be taking in this? Ultimately, parents do have the primary responsibility to ensure the safety of their children. So what kind of conversations should parents be having with their kids, and what kinds of boundaries should maybe be put into place?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I just want to stress that I think ultimately it's companies that are responsible for this. They've created it. It would be incredible to see a shift in prioritizing users over really at the end of the day the monetization of our attention and our data. But until we have those laws and change, yeah, there are definitely some things that parents can do. So one great step is to have conversations with your kids and with your teens so that they know what to do, building up their help seeking and their confidence in coming to you or maybe another safe adult if and when they do encounter upsetting content online. That can also include making them aware of our services. So, again, cybertip.ca would be where you might report sexual violence against children, or if you're wanting support after having online sexual violence happen to you or exposure to it, you can come to needhelpnow.ca. And, you know, both in this and other research, consistently we see that the number one thing that stops kids from getting help when they encounter these situations is being worried about getting in trouble or having judgment cast on them from the adults in their lives. So for parents, it's really important to try to work to let your kid know and then also practice being calm and non-judgmental when they do come to you in these situations. And we've got some great guides for that on another website that's called protectkidsonline.ca. Lots of great guides for parents to navigate these sorts of situations.
That's fabulous advice there, Katelin. Thank you so much for that, and thanks for sharing your expertise with us and what you have found with this study.
Thank you. Take care.